What would you think if I told you that a man never truly sees a woman when she is right in front of him? He thinks he does. He thinks he knows her laugh, her softness, her presence, but his vision is blurred by the comfort of her availability. When she is there, he assumes she will always be there. He mistakes consistency for permanence. And yet, when she steps back, when her silence replaces her giving, that is when his eyes finally open. That is when he begins to see her, not as the extension of his desires, but as the mirror of his own shadow. A man notices absence more than presence. It is a flaw of the masculine ego, a trick of its projection. While she is close, he sees not her essence, but his needs reflected in her: validation, warmth, admiration. He consumes her presence like air, thoughtlessly, until one day the air is gone and he is choking in the vacuum she leaves behind. That is when his psyche turns restless. That is when he realizes that what he thought was ordinary was extraordinary, that what he dismissed as constant was in fact a fragile gift. But what she discovers in that same moment is far greater: the truth of her power. For her absence is not merely a punishment, it is a revelation. It forces him to confront the woman not as an object of his comfort, but as a being who cannot be possessed. He sees her in the silence, in the space where her laughter used to echo, and he begins to grasp that she was not a shadow of him, she was a universe entire. This is where Jung's wisdom pierces most deeply. Man projects his anima, the feminine aspect of his unconscious, onto the woman before him. He does not see her as she is, he sees her as his soul imagines her. That is why, when she leaves, it feels like a death. A death, not of the woman, she is alive, breathing, free, but of the part of himself that he had placed upon her. Her absence strips him bare of illusion, and he is forced to meet his own loneliness, his own unhealed wound. And you? Have you ever realized what your absence does? Have you ever felt the trembling power of silence, the way the air changes when you no longer offer explanation, when you no longer bend your spirit to be understood? There is a sacred dignity in withholding. The Stoics knew it. Seneca warned that attachment to what is external breeds despair, while true freedom lies in the sovereignty of the soul. When you are no longer there, when you reclaim the pieces of yourself you scattered in the name of love, you rise above the cage of validation. Yet the man sees differently. His gaze becomes haunted. The coffee shop where you once sat together becomes unbearable. The quiet hum of evening turns hollow. He replays memories not because he honors you, but because he confronts himself. What he misses is not only you, it is the part of him that was alive in your presence. He begins to wrestle with a truth he once ignored, that his blindness was a choice, that he could have seen you, cherished you, honored you, yet he didn't. This is where the paradox blooms. Your absence teaches him, but it liberates you. For the woman who has withdrawn her light begins to see herself, not through his eyes, but through the calm clarity of solitude. She realizes that the silence which unsettles him brings her peace. She understands that what he calls emptiness is in fact fullness, the fullness of her reclaimed energy, her restored dignity. She begins to see that her worth was never tied to his gaze, never dependent on his recognition. Do you feel how dangerous this is? The moment you no longer crave to be seen, you become unforgettable. The man who once overlooked you is now consumed by your ghost, yet you, finally, are consumed by your own becoming. This is the sacred reversal. He loses sight, but you gain vision. He cling to memory, but you embody presence. What a man sees when you are no longer there is not only you, it is his failure to have ever truly seen you at all. And what you see in the stillness that follows is that you never needed to be witnessed to exist. You were whole before his eyes, and you are whole without them. The absence becomes your teacher. His longing becomes your liberation. When a woman steps out of a man's orbit, his psyche does not simply accept the loss. It spirals. What he first experiences is confusion. He wonders why the familiar rhythm has been broken, why the daily ease of her presence has suddenly vanished. At first, his mind seeks to rationalize. Perhaps she is busy, perhaps she will return, but beneath those rationalizations lurks the tremor of a deeper recognition. He is not entitled to her. He never was. The entitlement was an illusion constructed by his ego, a comfort fed by routine. Absence pierces like a blade because it confronts him with the truth of impermanence. Marcus Aurelius wrote that every attachment we cling to is on loan from the universe, destined to be taken back without warning. And yet men often live as though the women in their lives are fixed, eternal, guaranteed. Her departure shatters that illusion. Suddenly, he is face to face with mortality, with transience, with the truth that nothing can be held by force. In that void, he sees her differently. He remembers her smallest gestures, how she tilted her head when she listened, how her eyes carried both softness and storms, how her silence once comforted him. Those details, which once blurred into the background of his days, now shine with unbearable clarity. He begins to realize that he did not lose her in the moment she walked away. He lost her slowly. In every instance he failed to honor her essence. That is the torment of absence. It throws into sharp relief what was always taken for granted. For her, however, the departure carries a different weight. At first, the silence may sting. The urge to explain, to return, to be understood may whisper through her veins. But then comes a deeper breath, a quieter awareness. She notices how her body no longer bends around his moods, how her spirit no longer shrinks to fit the outline of his approval. She begins to taste freedom in the stillness. She sees that her worth is not measured by whether he misses her, but by the radiance she carries within herself, even when unseen. And you? Do you see the pattern? How often have you mistaken his blindness for your insufficiency? How often have you stretched yourself to be noticed, to be chosen, to be enough, when in truth his eyes were clouded by his own projections? Jung warned us, what one refuses to see in oneself, one projects onto the other. A man who cannot meet his own anima will never truly meet you. He will use you as a mirror but never witness your soul. And so your absence becomes not only his torment but his only chance at clarity. For the male ego, her withdrawal feels like betrayal. But it is not betrayal, it is revelation. It reveals his dependency, his hunger, his inability to stand in solitude. It unmasks the truth that his strength was never self-sustained, but borrowed from her constant giving. Without her presence, he is forced to meet his shadow. The loneliness he feels is not simply the loss of her, it is the echo of his own unloved self, finally heard in the silence she leaves behind. This is why absence transforms a woman's power. Presence often keeps her entangled in proving, in explaining, in softening herself to be digestible. But absence refuses compromise. It does not argue, it does not chase, it does not beg. It simply stands as a mirror, reflecting back to him the cost of his blindness. In that reflection, he either crumbles or awakens. Some men retreat into tenace, unable to face the shadow. Others, rarely, begin the slow work of self-confrontation, of seeing themselves not through her presence, but through their own unflinching gaze. But the deeper truth is this: her power is not measured by what his absence does to him, but by what her absence does for her. It is in that space that she rediscovers her own song, her own rhythm, her own fire. It is there that she learns what Epictetus meant when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." She becomes free not because he finally sees her, but because she no longer needs to be seen to exist fully. Absence, then, is not emptiness, it is creation. It is the fertile ground where a woman grows back into herself. It is the quiet where she reclaims the energy she once poured into proving, and as she walks deeper into that freedom, the man who once overlooked her remains haunted by the spectre of what he lost, never realizing that the truest vision he ever had of her was the one granted only when she was no longer there. The silence that follows her absence does not merely echo in his ears, it reverberates through the chambers of his unconscious. At first, he confuses the ache for love, telling himself that what he feels is devotion. But love without presence is merely memory, and memory can be deceiving. What he longs for is not truly her, but the reflection of himself he once found in her gaze. She was the mirror where he glimpsed tenderness, significance, even fragments of his forgotten boyhood. Without her, he must face the blank surface of solitude where no reflection stares back. This is why absence unsettles men more deeply than presence ever comforts them. Presence can be ignored, taken for granted, absorbed into routine, but absence commands attention. Absence refuses to be silenced. It lingers like a ghost, demanding recognition. He begins to notice the weight of her missing, how the air feels thinner, how laughter tastes bitter, how time drags. What he cannot admit, even to himself, is that the woman he thought he owned was never his and all. She was a sovereign force, one that simply allowed him to dwell in her orbit until she chose to withdraw. For her, however, the silence becomes a sanctuary. In it, she begins to hear her own voice again, one that was once drowned out by the noise of explaining, pleading, adjusting. She notices the freedom in waking without the heaviness of his moods, the clarity of walking without waiting for his approval. Her absence is not merely distance, it is transformation. She is no longer the woman who tolerated blindness, who bargained for scraps of attention. She becomes a woman who does not need to be seen, for she has finally learned to see herself. And you, can you feel the danger in this shift? A woman who no longer fears being unseen becomes untouchable. She no longer bargains with her worth. She no longer waits for recognition. She no longer bends her spirit into palatable shapes to be chosen. The power of her absence is not in how much he misses her, but in how much she no longer misses him. That is the fracture point, the irreversible crossing. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of integrating the shadow, becoming whole. In her absence, he is forced into that fire. The anima he once projected onto her must now be found within. If he cannot bear the solitude, he will collapse into bitterness, blaming her for his emptiness. But if he dares to endure it, he may begin the slow labor of self-recognition. For absence is a brutal teacher. It strips away illusion, leaving only what is raw and real. But do not mistake this. Her absence is not a lesson crafted for him. It is not her duty to awaken him. It is her right to free herself. His awakening, if it comes, is merely a byproduct of her courage. The real transformation is hers. She steps away and discovers that her power does not depend on who sees it. She no longer craves the validation that once anchored her to his blindness. She understands what Seneca meant when he said, "He who is brave is free." Her bravery is not in staying, it is in leaving, in embracing the unknown weight of solitude and finding that it does not crush her, but restores her. For the man, her absence becomes an obsession. He replays conversations, texts, memories. He asks himself why she left, why she no longer answers, why her laughter no longer fills the air. What he cannot face is that she did not simply vanish. She evolved beyond the reach of his grasp. He remembers her as she was, but she no longer exists in that form. The woman he misses is a ghost, and she has no intention of haunting herself to return. This is the paradox that absence reveals. He sees her most clearly when she is gone, but she sees herself most clearly because she left. He mourns a reflection while she embraces reality. He circles in longing, while she walks forward in freedom, and as the distance grows, his vision sharpens in regret, but hers sharpens in clarity. He begins to realize that the greatest tragedy was not her absence, but his blindness while she was present, and she realizes the greatest liberation was not his loss, but her return to herself. When the dust of her departure settles, the man begins to feel the slow burn of truth. At first, he searches for distraction, work, noise, fleeting company. But none of it dulls the ache, because the ache is not about her body or her voice. It is about the rupture of his illusions. He begins to see that she was ever just a presence to be consumed. She was a force that animated parts of him he had long abandoned. Without her, the mirror of his unconscious lies shattered, and he is left staring at the emptiness of his own shadow. The psyche resists such confrontation. Jung understood this. The human mind prefers projection to self-awareness. It is easier to cling to the image of her than to descend into the cavern of one's own wounds. So he remembers her as idealized, elevating her in memory to the very pedestal he denied her in life. The paradox is cruel. While she was near, he minimized her. Once she is gone, he sanctifies her. Yet this sanctification is not true recognition. It is nostalgia, guilt, and longing woven together, a desperate attempt to preserve the illusion that she was his to define. But her absence does not keep her still. For the woman who leaves is never frozen in memory, she is reborn in motion. She steps into solitude not as a void but as a canvas. At first she may tremble. There may be nights when silence feels heavier than presence, when loneliness presses against her ribs. Yet with each day the silence shifts from heaviness to liberation. She begins to notice the subtle ways her spirit expands, unapologetic, unobserved, unchained. She discovers that absence does not diminish her, it multiplies her. And you, have you ever felt that strange alchemy? The way solitude first burns, then heals. The way being unseen feels like death at first, only to reveal itself as rebirth. You have been told that your worth blooms in his gaze, but absence teaches otherwise. Absence whispers that your worth is elemental, untouchable, woven into your being regardless of who sees or fails to see it. The courage to embody that truth is the mark of a sovereign woman. The man, meanwhile, wrestles with his shadow. He recalls the moments when she was present yet invisible to him, when her laughter was met with indifference, when her wisdom was dismissed, when her softness was consumed without gratitude. Now those memories become daggers. He sees them replayed with brutal clarity, and each one reminds him that blindness has consequences. His suffering is not punishment from her, it is the natural debt of his own neglect. And yet, in this torment lies possibility. Jung taught that the shadow, when faced, can be integrated. If he dares to confront the pain her absence stirs, he may begin to see himself more honestly. He may realize that the love he projected outward must be cultivated inward. He may discover that she was not the source of his wholeness, but the spark that revealed its absence. For some men, this awakening becomes a doorway. For others, it becomes a prison. The difference lies in whether they choose blame or responsibility. For her, however, the path is clearer. She learns that detachment is not cruelty, but clarity. To withdraw does not mean to hate, it means to honor. It means to honor the self that has been silenced too long, to honor the energy that has been poured out too freely, to honor the dignity that no longer wishes to beg for recognition. She becomes like water, flowing without apology, shaping her own course without waiting for permission. This is the essence of Stoic wisdom. Freedom lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. A woman who withdraws her presence is not controlled by the hunger of his gaze. She walks with the serenity of one who knows that her worth was never contingent on his sight. Her absence becomes her declaration. I am whole, even unseen. The man sees this, even if he cannot name it. He feels the difference. He senses that she no longer orbits his gravity. This realization terrifies him, for it means she is beyond retrieval, beyond his reach, beyond his narrative. He begins to understand that she does not belong to his story. He was only a chapter in hers. And as she continues to walk further into her own becoming, he finally learns the sharpest truth. Absence reveals that losing her was never the tragedy. The tragedy was failing to see her while she was still there. And the liberation, for her, is knowing that she no longer needs to be seen to exist as fully as she was always meant to be. There comes a moment after the mourning and the bargaining when the man's vision sharpens in a way it never did before. He no longer sees her through the haze of familiarity, nor through the illusions of possession. He sees her as absence embodied, an outline carved in memory, untouchable, unreachable, and it is here in this sharpened vision that the weight of his blindness bears down. He realizes that his neglect was not harmless, that every time he looked past her, every time he silenced her voice with his indifference, he was not merely ignoring her, he was erasing himself. For to dismiss the feminine is to dismiss one's own soul. Jung knew this. The anima, when denied, becomes distorted. A man who refuses to honor the feminine presence before him creates a famine within himself. He starves his own capacity for empathy, imagination, tenderness. When she is gone, the famine becomes unbearable. His longing is not only for her body or her voice, it is for the vitality she awakened in him, the dimension of his own being he cannot access without facing the feminine truth he once rejected. Meanwhile, her absence is no longer about him at all. It ceases to be a statement of what she will or will not tolerate. It evolves into something greater, an act of alignment. She is no longer rebelling against his blindness. She is simply walking toward her own light. She discovers, perhaps for the first time, that silence is not emptiness. It is space. Space to breathe, to grow, to create. Space to hear her own thoughts without interruption, to feel her own rhythm without distortion. What he calls abandonment, she calls return. And do you feel how sacred this is? To no longer measure your worth by how loudly someone aches for you. To no longer let your value rise or fall on the tide of his attention. That is where the deepest empowerment lies, not in the chaos of being missed, but in the serenity of no longer needing to be. When you embody this, you step into a realm where nothing external can shake you. You no longer crave to be chosen, for you have chosen yourself. The man watches from a distance, bewildered by her transformation. He remembers the woman who once softened her voice to be heard, who once bent her boundaries to be kept, who once gave endlessly to be valued. But she is no longer that woman. She has burned in the fire of absence and emerged as something unyielding, untouchable. He sees her, perhaps more clearly than ever, but it is too late, for she no longer requires his recognition. His sight, once begged for, now means nothing. This is the cruel grace of absence. It grants him clarity but strips him of power. It grants her sovereignty but strips her of illusion. In this dance, she rises while he falls, not because she wished him harm, but because she no longer carries the weight of his blindness. She has given it back to him where it always belonged. He now faces the shadows of his own making, and yet there is mercy hidden in this pain, for the man, if he chooses, can awaken. He can see that what he lost was not a possession but a teacher, that her absence is not a punishment but an invitation to grow. He can learn that true vision comes not from consuming presence but from honoring it, that to see a woman is to witness her essence without trying to own it, to cherish her without trying to bind her. Most will not rise to this understanding, but some, faced with the silence of absence, will finally begin the work of individuation. For her, there is no such weight to bear. She is free, free from the need to be understood, free from the exhaustion of being explained, free from the diminishment of being overlooked. She has stepped into the wisdom the Stoics lived by, that true strength is self-command. She realizes that the deepest peace comes not from being seen, but from being whole without sight. And so, what a man sees when she's no longer there is his own failure, his own shadow, his own emptiness. What she sees is her own rebirth, her own sovereignty, her own unshakable worth. In this final reversal lies the truth. He becomes haunted, while she becomes free. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses,